Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and the US elections are just around the corner, and it really seems like everyone has just lost their minds. Now, I think it's important for me to state that I cannot bring myself to vote in this election, because it would be illegal. I'm not from the US. So this will essentially be an outsider's view. But it is important for me to note that I want the US to do well. If the US does badly, then that often has negative effects to the rest of the world. Anyway, in this election, to me, it kind of seems like there's a clear choice as to who the better candidate is. On one side, you have an attempt at policy plans that could potentially alleviate inflation in the future. You also have an attempt at reaching across the aisle while also saying that the other side will implement really bad stuff if they get in. On the other side, however, you have concepts of a plan that essentially boil down to, remember when our guy was in? Things were going good. Vote for him again and things will be going good again. You've also got the classic misinformation and sometimes just straight up lying, as well as protectionist policies that would actually hurt America rather than help it. If you couldn't tell, the first candidate that I was talking about was Kamala Harris and the second candidate was Donald Trump. Now, neither of these candidates are perfect, which is certainly a criticism that I have of a lot of left-leaning people who expect Kamala Harris to implement socialism. By the way, for anyone that's calling Kamala Harris a communist or even a socialist, she is not. She is not going to implement socialism. She's a liberal. So much, in fact, that she says some incredibly stupid stuff at times. Just take a listen.
It used to be global warming, and that wasn't working because we're actually cooling. So we have that, but you know the biggest warming problem we have is nuclear warming.
Oh, sorry, wrong stupid clip. This is the one that I was meant to play.
Do you believe that transgender Americans should have access to gender-affirming care in this country?
I believe we should follow the law.
What do you mean you should follow the law? In this kind of situation, you can write the law. It's not something that is set in stone, handed down from God. You get to create laws. That's what the government does. That being said, Donald Trump also says some pretty stupid stuff, like the global warming comment from earlier. However, neither of these seem to be the issues that Americans really care about. If Americans really cared about climate change, Donald Trump would have never been allowed anywhere near the White House. If Americans really cared about trans rights, then we'd be hearing a lot more about it during this election cycle. The thing that Americans really care about is inflation, except they don't really understand inflation because inflation just seems to be this eldritch being that has always existed. Now, what Americans seem to want from whoever becomes president, and understandably so, is negative inflation. They want the cost of living to go down and the price of groceries to return to pre-pandemic levels. Neither Kamala Harris nor Donald Trump will achieve this. At best, they'll be able to keep inflation low, and all they have to do to keep inflation low is nothing radical. As long as politicians don't implement policies that are heavily detrimental and nothing major happens over the next 4 years, inflation will probably stay pretty low.
Did you just float out the idea of getting rid of income taxes and replacing it with tariffs?
Well, okay.
Were you serious about that?
Yeah, sure. But why not? Because ready? Our country was the richest relatively in the 1880s and 1890s. A president who was assassinated named McKinley. He was the tariff king. He spoke beautifully of tariffs. His language was really beautiful.
So, something like that would cause quite a few problems. So firstly, things like tax cuts, generally pretty inflationary. The New Zealand government has been advised not to do them because of this fact. Now, you could try to argue that what he's proposing there is not actually a tax cut, but a replacement of income tax. Though I think a better argument would be that he's not actually going to get rid of income tax, and I'd probably agree with you on that, but he will still be implementing tariffs. And tariffs, well, they're inflationary because the cost of the tariff generally gets passed on to the consumer. Now, if tariffs are so bad, why would anybody implement them? The idea is that it's supposed to encourage the purchasing of domestic product over foreign product. If foreign products become too expensive, then everyone would just buy domestic, which encourages domestic job growth. This sounds all well and good until you realize that America didn't just fall out of a coconut tree. It exists within the context of the world. When America places tariffs on another country, that country can place tariffs on America too. What this means is that when America places tariffs on another country, countries are likely to respond by placing tariffs on America. this has happened in Donald Trump's last term as president. The result of this was farmers getting hit pretty hard because China placed retaliatory tariffs on US agricultural exports. So with Donald Trump wanting to place tariffs on everyone else, what that will result in is everyone else placing tariffs on the US, which will hurt US exports. Now you might be wondering, well, why didn't Joe Biden just get rid of Donald Trump's tariffs? And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is you don't want to get rid of tariffs on a country that has tariffs on you unless you can get the other country to agree to also get rid of their tariffs. Secondly, Joe Biden does believe that tariffs will bring jobs back to America. He isn't going to get rid of something that he thinks will bring jobs back. I think most people can agree that Joe Biden certainly isn't the smartest person in the world, no matter what side you're on.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Now, another issue that Americans seem to care a lot about is immigration. And on this issue, both Harris and Trump lean the same way. The difference between them is that whilst Kamala Harris has a slight lean, Donald Trump has such an extreme lean that he's essentially at a 90-degree angle. Trump's policy is essentially mass deportations, which if there's someone who is illegally in the US, then they get deported. Now there's a few issues with this. Firstly, there's some labor in the US that comes from illegal immigrants. You get rid of these illegal immigrants and then the productivity of the US goes down, which hurts the economy. There is also the fact that with mass deportations, people who are in the US legally can also get caught up in them. They may not always get deported, but also to just get detained when you've done absolutely nothing wrong can be quite traumatic. That is something that I know about from first-hand experience. However, from Kamala Harris, you have a much more border-focused policy, which is focused on actually having the resources there to be able to manage the border. For example, having more judges to process asylum claims so that asylum claims can be processed as someone is trying to enter the country, rather than there being a huge backlog, and by the time they're processed, well, they're already in the country anyway, regardless of whether the claim is valid or not. This was actually a part of a bill that Trump asked to get shot down because he wanted to be able to run on immigration. Kinda hard to run on immigration if immigration gets solved. I'm also unsure about what Trump might do to people who are legally in the US, who him and JD Vance have been trying to demonize, like the Haitians in Springfield, for example. If those kinds of people are on his to deport list, especially when it comes to Springfield, Ohio, well, those people are vital to the local economy there. You get rid of them and the local economy crashes. Trump has also tried to raise concern about fentanyl being brought into the US via illegal immigrants, when what actually happens is it usually comes through legal ports of entry. The way to solve that is through more resources to check what's actually coming into the country rather than just deporting people. I'd hope that Trump would have a better plan for that than deportations. Anyway, those are the two main issues I can see people voting on. If you vote for Trump, the economy is not going to do well. It's not just me saying that, it's the experts that are saying that. Which, that brings us to another point. Trump and the Republican Party at this point fundamentally do not trust experts. Experts unfortunately get things wrong, and this leads a lot of people to ask, well, how can I trust experts if they're constantly getting things wrong? Unfortunately, this has also led some people to think that they know better than the experts. What this results in is policy that has no backing behind it. If you want a policy that is going to do well, you want someone educated to take a look and go, yeah, this seems valid. Without that, it's all just vibes. It's just, oh, I think this policy will do well, so let's try it out, despite all the warnings from people that know what the impact of this will be. Let's just implement more tariffs, even though last time that happened it was a huge detriment to the agricultural sector. Let's just ignore the evidence of that because it's inconvenient. Whilst we're at it, might as well just get rid of NASA because the Earth is flat, despite all the evidence, right? And this is my real issue with American politics at the moment. It's not evidence-based. You have people that are actively denying evidence and making up misinformation. The Haitians eating cats and dogs thing was a completely fabricated story with no basis in reality, yet you had people like JD Vance pushing it because it was politically convenient to them. That in and of itself should be disqualifying for the majority of people, but we live in an age where people ignore the facts. That's why there are flat earthers. I would hope people can see that it's not just a difference in opinion that's being dealt with here. It's a difference in what people believe to fundamentally be true. The earth is not flat, Haitians aren't eating cats and dogs, and tariffs do not do well for the economy. To dispute these facts is to be wrong, to trust your own instincts over people that have actually looked into this kind of stuff. Just because it's a political subject does not make all opinions on it valid. I mean, evolution has been politicized at times. Do we then think that young Earth creationists are valid when they criticize evolution? I'd hope not. Are we going to argue about whether smoking is bad for you and saying that both sides have an equally valid opinion just because it's been politicized? You see how bad this is, right? Unfortunately, this has been done with climate change, and the data on climate change is clear. Climate change is happening and is caused by humans. You can argue what the best thing to do about it is, but you cannot deny that it's happening. But some people do!
It used to be global warming, and that wasn't working because we're actually cooling. So we have that, but you know the biggest warming problem we have is nuclear warming.
So yes, not every political opinion is valid. You do not just get to have your opinion and have it unchallenged when your opinion is dead wrong. Anyway, I want to give Trump credit for something, to highlight a difference between when he was president and now that he's running for president again, and that is that Operation Warp Speed was actually a good thing that he did. There is also the First Step Act, but that's not really relevant to my point. Operation Warp Speed was good because it basically allowed vaccines to get produced faster for COVID-19. Under a second Trump presidency, if that were needed, I do not think that it would happen again because of RFK Jr. This is because if Trump wins, then it's very likely that RFK, who is an anti-vaxxer, would be appointed to Trump's cabinet, which means that he could give advice on things like health policy. RFK has also called for an end to water fluoridation in the US, and just to be perfectly clear, we're talking about fluoride in water, not Florida in water. But water fluoridation around the world has been shown to improve dental health. Some people claim that it can cause adverse side effects, but none of those adverse side effects have been confirmed. Banning fluoride in water makes about as much sense as banning fluoride in toothpaste, and honestly, I think some places in the US have a much bigger problem with their water, if I'm being perfectly honest. So this will not be the same administration that America got back in 2016. It will be a very different, more extreme administration. And the glimmer of hope that we have that this isn't just going to be the worst case scenario, that there's still some kind of integrity left, is that Donald Trump has tried to distance himself from Project 2025. However, I'm not convinced that there won't be any attempt whatsoever to maybe try to implement certain parts of it, especially given that Trump seems to want people that are more loyal to him than to America, and Project 2025 does call for firing a bunch of federal workers and replacing them with Trump loyalists. If Trump gets in, then I'd worry that that kind of corruption could just become standard practice in the US. And we know that Trump is corrupt. The whole trying to withhold aid to Ukraine unless they investigate Biden, that is just peak corruption. He has also been charged on 34 felony counts. Are people just going to let someone who's so blatantly corrupt back in the White House? There is also the whole thing with Elon Musk essentially trying to buy votes in swing states, which should be illegal, but do you think that he'll get charged if Donald Trump wins? If you do not like corruption, then do not vote for Donald Trump. I know some people will say, well, politics is all corrupt anyway. And sure, I'd agree with you there. But voting for the person who's obviously and blatantly corrupt does not fix that problem. Now, I do know that there are some people that have some legitimate concerns about Kamala Harris, especially in regards to what's happening in Gaza. Now, when it comes to that issue, a lot of people's solution is to protest vote, whether it be voting for Jill Stein or just not voting at all. Now, when it comes to protesting, this is probably the most inefficient kind of protest. Firstly, you risk Donald Trump getting in, who is not going to be better on the issue at all. He is not even going to call for a ceasefire. Secondly, you don't get to write down the reasons why you're not voting for someone. If you don't vote, then they have no idea why you didn't vote. The reason why you didn't vote could always just be that you didn't think either side had a good enough policy on inflation. That could be it. Your best option is to vote for the person with the most realistic chance of getting in, who most closely aligns with what you want on the issue, even if it's just the tiniest bit better than the other side. At least that way, other forms of protest can be more effective because the person in power isn't completely hostile to your cause. A saying that comes to mind about this is, do not let perfect be the enemy of good. Another thing I want to touch on is just how bleak things look. A lot of the polling is saying that Trump's going to win, and a lot of people are pointing to Polymarket saying, look, Trump is clearly going to win because a lot of people are betting on Trump. The first thing to note is that betting markets are pretty biased, especially poly markets, seeing as Elon Musk has been promoting that. The second thing is that polls can be wrong. They were wrong in 2016, but for them to be wrong, people actually have to go out and vote against what the poll is saying. Elections are not won by people sitting at home and resigning themselves to whoever someone else votes for. Elections are won by people going out and voting for who they think will be the best candidate. And although neither candidate is perfect, there is one candidate who is way better than the other. The best case scenario for a Trump presidency is that he does nothing for 4 years, does none of the things that he says that he's going to do, and does nothing that could potentially be on the table for him to do. Oh, and an important part of that would be Trump actually surviving the 4 years, because I think a JD Vance presidency would be worse. Now, I will be doing a live stream covering the election as the results are coming in. And let's say you disagree with me. You think that I should talk to a political commentator who maybe knows a bit more than me. Try to put us in contact, because I think that would be a good thing to do. I don't claim to be an expert on everything, and there's certainly some things that maybe I could learn more about. Or maybe you want me to talk to someone who I agree with, and, you know, that is certainly an option too. I'd like to talk to people who are a bit more involved in the field, I guess. And also, I'm not from America. I don't have to endure the direct effects of a Trump or Harris presidency, only secondary effects. But I do hope that maybe I've been able to provide a bit of useful insight, and maybe some people might consider things from a different point of view. But all that being said, the important thing is, between you and me, go out and vote.